Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. When I wrote my introduction to tonight's seminar, I said, thanks for coming and braving the cold and wet, because I wrote it yesterday. So we got a little reprieve today. So thanks for coming on such a nice day. My name is Matt Simon. If I haven't met you, I hope to meet you later. I'm the university's senior licensing manager for engineering and the physical sciences. This fall, we're offering a mini seminar series called Hot Topics in IP and Technology, where we're inviting experts to come in and talk about the latest in IP topics and emerging technology and their implications on research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to thank our very generous sponsors for the series, Hamilton Brook Smith Reynolds, who's a Boston-based full-service intellectual property law firm, and Saunders & Silverstein, a law firm based in Amesbury, Mass. that provides services related to trademarks, copyright, internet software, and entertainment law. I invite you to visit the front table where the name tags were to take a look at their materials. And following the presentation, we invite you to stick around and have a nice little networking session. I see some of you have already partook in the food and beverages. Please feel free. If you're under 21, we have non-alcoholic beverages as well. And without further ado, our speaker this evening is Tonya Evans. Dean Evans is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and a Professor of Law at the UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law. She directs the school's blockchain, cryptocurrency, and law online professional certificate program and developed its world-class instructor pool and curriculum. Dean Evans' expertise in areas of intellectual property, new technologies including blockchain and distributed ledger technology, and entrepreneurship and innovation. I'm looking forward to learning what distributed ledger technology is. I'm assuming it has something to do with buying houses or property, but I don't know.
Exactly.
Oh, am I right? All right, cool, of course. So finally, before we actually dive in, I want to share a little bit about Dean Evans' history. Dean Evans attended Northwestern University on a 4-year tennis scholarship. Thereafter, she competed on the women's professional tennis circuit and played most notably in the US Open, Virginia Slims of Philadelphia, and Lipton in 1993. That's the real deal. After retiring from the tennis circuit in 1995, she attended Howard University on an academic scholarship to earn her JD. Please join me in welcoming Dean Evans as she embarks on a discussion about blockchain, IP, and data science.
I'm extremely excited that I get to wonk out and nerd out on something that is near and dear to my heart, and I did not start in this area at all. Did it pop up again?
I think Salesforce is trying to take over my computer.
That would, data science or data privacy and security, let's work on that. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the program that we run at the law school, which is the online professional certificate that Matt mentioned. It was a really exciting opportunity for us to create something truly for the non-technologist who knows just enough to know that they want to know more, to take that deeper dive that we talk about to say, this sounds like it's not going anywhere. I see IBM commercials every 90 seconds about something about supply chain. I see the crypto boom and bust. What is this Bitcoin thing? Drug money, don't want anything to do with it. And then it's like, actually, the number one drug money is still the almighty dollar, so let's not completely, freak out on that concept, right? Actually, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and I'll get into it with the substance of my remarks, is far more traceable. You may have heard and my intention today is to dispel some of the myths and to give you, without using all of the buzzwords and all the things that tend to really confuse and confound people, to say, what exactly is this? And I also am not here to convince you that it's great. I have my own personal opinion about crypto, but this is informational, so that you can empower yourself to say, first of all, what is this? Does it make sense? What does it mean for my family, for my job, for my career, for my sector within an industry? How might this change or might not? Because what you'll learn today, if you're not already aware, is we're really just talking about a different type of database, a different database structure, a different way to store and verify information. Bottom line. Sometimes you just need a pure client-server model, and it is controlled by one entity, and that's absolutely fine. And that's fine, actually, in most cases. But there are some instances where this type of data storage and verification actually can really transform things in a really exciting way. And so that's what my intention is as we move through the information today. The program is focused, some of my law students take it, but it also is for those not on the law school at all because it's online. They're everywhere. They are in the financial industry from a fintech perspective. They come from healthcare. They come from sports, entertainment, and media. And so there's something for everyone. And that's the other thing that's really exciting about this new type of database structure using some old technology. It actually is several different things that we'll talk about combined in a novel way to do something new and really important. So as we move through, I will begin with what blockchain is, a bit about its origin. This person, Satoshi, whoever she is, because we don't know, could be a woman, we don't know, how it works to be sure. And then I'll talk a little bit about intellectual property. I am an intellectual property lawyer by training. I practiced for 10 years before I started teaching, and I've been in academia for 13 years. And so in order to really get to the sweet spot of some interesting use cases in intellectual property and ways to solve for some age-old problems in the space, I'll talk about the different types of intellectual property, obviously at a very high level given the time that we have. But that will inform our discussion going forward. I am not a data scientist, but given the fact that we're at this R1 awesome university and data is the new oil to be sure, and we're talking about a database, then the interesting synergies, and it would be great for a future conversation to take a deeper dive, bring some other experts in and to really understand about the intersection of storage and verification and the analysis that one does on the data science point of view. Alrighty, so just a few statistics to level set and to show the impact, not just potential, well, we're talking in terms of statistics, so we are talking prospectively, but the idea, and this comes from the World Economic Forum, that global blockchain in retail market size is valued to be at 44.2 million USD in 2017 and projected to reach 2.3 billion with a B by 2023. From Deloitte Insights, blockchain technologies business value add will grow to 176 billion with a B by 2025. And from, again, the World Economic Forum, 10% of the global GDP will be stored using blockchains by 2027. Now, we are weeks away from not only a new year, but a new decade. So this is really, when I talk about, I tell my students, we have white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs. We're focused on new-collar jobs and what that's going to look like in Web 3.0, because we're talking about the next decade, some pretty seismic shifts in work and career. I always start with this definition of blockchain at the beginning of my course, and we're actually at the end now in our 13th week, and I love to see the evolution of the definition. We shouldn't include more words, but at the end of the course, we have a better understanding in the relationship of all of the various parts. But this is where we'll start for now. Decentralized databases. You'll hear decentralized and distributed a lot when people try to explain what blockchains are. I'll get to that in a minute. But a database maintained by a distributed network of computers that rely on two things: network effects and economic incentives in order to secure the network. So again, decentralized databases. So not just stored with one entity that controls and disseminates the information, but a number of different nodes. Distributed over a network of computers. So again, there's no central point of failure because the information, the single source of truth, is distributed across these computers, and I'll say more about that in a moment. The network effects are important as well. That gets to what you may have heard of, something called consensus. And there are various types of achieving consensus that the majority or by consensus would agree what the source of truth is on that network. Various economic incentives that you want to incentivize actors within the network to do the right thing. We're always worried about bad actors and attacks from different vectors. And you have heard of a number of different hacks, but it's never a blockchain. It's always a honeypot when you talk about exchanges. I'll say more about that in a moment, but you've heard a lot about hacks. It tends to focus on an exchange where people are transferring their crypto in order to exchange Bitcoin for Ethereum, or Ethereum for XRP, or XRP for DAI, et cetera, et cetera. And when you turn over control of your crypto over to an exchange that has to take over control in order to exchange, that's where the honeypot is. That's where people spend all day trying to hack because that's where the money is. It's not my wallet because I don't have control over it because it's in an exchange with my intention to change Bitcoin into Ethereum, which is another type of cryptocurrency. So pay attention to that. There are ways that we're very concerned about attacks on blockchain protocols, but what you've heard in the news is not focused in that regard. In order to understand Web 3.0 and where we're moving, it's good to take a look back on where we began from a computing point of view, and Web 1.0 that was centralized and very passive. You have the, oops, that wouldn't be good, come back. Is there a pointer? Is there?
It won't show up on the screen though.
Okay. The centralized model where you'll have the server and all of the clients, and it was the pure dissemination of information, which was groundbreaking at the time. We look back on it now and say it has its benefits, but it has certainly its drawbacks as well, because this would be our single point of failure. If that server goes down, forget about it. Interestingly, how many people heard of Valentine's Day TextGate recently? Anyone? Right, so I wake up on November 8th, minding my own business, text goes off, and I get a text from someone I used to date. This is highly personal, but we are friends now, so I will tell you. I said, that is really odd. I think they've gone crazy. I'm not even going to respond. And it's like, I don't know who's calling. I don't know. Let's not fight about it. That afternoon, they reach out to me and say, I don't understand your text. And I said, I don't understand this text, and I didn't understand the one that came at 3 a.m. We exchanged screenshots, and long story short, a server that went down on Valentine's Day just started up. They fixed it, and there was a gap in time of about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. Any text that went out during that time was trapped in the queue and was released on November 8th, right? There's a centralized server, had the information, so that's a whole other conversation about what happens to our data that's just hanging out, waiting to ruin lives, right? That is one of the best ways to talk about a centralized client-server model. We think we live in a distributed world, but it's really decentralized when we have Facebook, Amazon, Google, et cetera, right? Apple. So it's decentralized in the sense that it's no longer just the government or education. Now it's corporations and educational institutions, but still, and we have our servers here at UNH, et cetera, et cetera. So decentralized, but still decentralized with the traditional client-server model. Web 3.0 envisions fully distributed, fully peer-to-peer, the complete disintermediation of the dissemination of information, and now not just information, but value. And that's where crypto comes into play. All right, so that's kind of the genesis of what the vision is. Love Don and Alex Tapscott. I recommend Blockchain Revolution to you, fantastic book. Also, now that we're talking about books, Michael Casey and Paul Vigna have a fantastic couple of books, actually, that talk about the background, the origins, and the history. It's not a how-to, it's like why come, right, to figure it out. So those are really great books. But I mentioned value because we are used to disseminating information. The idea of Web 3.0 is now we can move value in a way that doesn't rely on, if you're talking pure cryptocurrency, on a bank, for example. In the same way that we can send email, which was the first killer app for the internet. That the first killer app, we're kind of still waiting for another one because I don't know if it's a killer from a cryptocurrency perspective, but it certainly was the first use case. But it's not the only thing for distributed ledgers, some of which are pure public blockchains. So we'll get to that. All right, so recording not just financial transactions as we do with like a double ledger entry system, but everything of value. People are thinking, so you may hear the term tokenization of assets, about digital representations of something that's in the physical. Illinois, there are certain counties in Illinois, they have a sandbox, and they're playing with the idea of moving all of their public records for real estate onto blockchains. That's a great use case if it works, because it's public information anyway. It's just really hard to get, and you can get bad actors, and it's very difficult to control that information. And so that's another way beyond cryptocurrency where you could have the digital representation that we call in this space the tokenization of real world assets, everything of value. It makes things more liquid. Cryptocurrencies are 24/7, 365. They don't close. There's no trade settlement plus 3 days after the trade. Instantaneous, far less expensive. And so those are some of the things that you can do, and that's why we talk about it as everything of value. Why? Why did Satoshi do this? So first, the origin. Back in 2008, Satoshi, whoever he, she, or they are, we don't know. It's one of the great mysteries of the space. Sat down to write a 9-page white paper. And I think it only has 9 footnotes. And now that I say 9 and 9, I'm wondering if even that has it's like a little Easter egg that I haven't figured out yet. So in 2008, it was published. I have a link here. I'll share that so that you can see, but it's widely searchable as well. And explained that Satoshi wanted to solve for what we know as the double spend problem. And it's a concern in the 20th century with the advent of the internet and digital technology, because I could have a perfect digital copy of music, for example. I could send it out to 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 of my close friends and not so close friends. I don't exhaust my copy, and now they have a perfect digital copy as well, right? And so that was problematic not just in the music and entertainment industry, but certainly if it takes that long to settle, that if I send $100 to you and also send $100 to you, but I only have $100, and it takes time for my bank to settle. Yes, Dean Evans had $100, she sent it to A received it, but in the same time, without it being settled at the end of the day, on both sides of the bank, before the central bank level, everything is reconciled. It takes a lot of time and a lot of bad actors in between. So we're solving for we're solving for the double spend problem for digital currency. We think we live in a digital world, but it's really just a digital veneer over the same old double entry ledger system. And because all of this is still going on in the background, even though digital technology facilitates the ability for us to open up an app, transfer money, all of the real hard work is still done this way. So the idea is to transfer beyond this to get to a new way that crypto in general, Bitcoin, the original idea, was meant to be the people's money. It actually scares people because we're not used to being in control of our assets. When I talk about, yes, I'm going to hold my crypto and it's going to be in my wallet, and it's like, well, what happens if I lose it? What happens if you lose $100? It's gone. So we have become accustomed to trusted intermediaries to make us whole again if something goes wrong. But they exact a nice premium for the privilege. And the idea is to take that back and have control over our own money, our own value, our own lives. It comes with its attendant risks for sure, but that's the idea. Here are the key components. So I talked about several different technologies that have been combined in a novel way to create blockchain. And it relies on peer-to-peer networks, been around since the 90s. Public-private key cryptographic encryption and digital signature that's been around since the 1930s, at least. And the internet. Using all of these in a novel way to combine to and we'll go through specifically what blockchain is as well, but these are the basic components. And in terms of the core characteristics, and again, some of these words you will come into to contact with as you continue to research in the space, but the fact that you can add to it but you can't change it. You can't go back and change it. So app-end only. I will, as an aside, say I'm talking about a pure public permissionless blockchain like the Bitcoin blockchain. There are other types that are permissioned, like they control who has access to it. There are a lot of reasons to do that, but it's not a pure permissionless chain. Like for Bitcoin, for example, if you have a Bitcoin wallet and you can onboard to get crypto, or somebody gives you Bitcoin, you're in. No one gets to decide whether or not you get to have a bank account or filling out all of this paperwork. Now, there is something called Know Your Customer, or KYC, and AML, anti-money laundering. And in the United States in particular, a lot of our regulatory bodies are trying to make sure that we don't have illicit activity and the dark web and all of the other things replicated in the space, to be sure. But the idea of getting away from people or entities, maybe governments, having control over whether you have assets. Ask anybody in Argentina or Venezuela, where you go to bed one day and you have money and you wake up the next day and you don't. So we can't fully appreciate countries that have a stable economy and stable government. We can make fun of the political and all these other things, but seriously, you travel outside of the country and you'll come back and you'll kiss the ground as you're landing, right? There are places that are beautiful all over the world, but we have a world currency. If you travel, people love to get a dollar. Everywhere in the world. That means a lot. So it's more difficult for us to appreciate why this even matters. Why would you want crypto? I have dollars. Right, but that doesn't work in much of the world for the underbanked and unbanked. It makes a tremendous difference. Money settlements, if I were to send $1,000 to another country, by the time it gets there, is it still $1,000? When will it get there? It goes through so many different intermediaries before that. $1,000 is not $1,000 by the time it gets to wherever. Okay, so the app-end only, disintermediated, removing the intermediaries. Transnational, it's borderless. It's very vexing and confounding to governments who are used to controlling their currency, and our Constitution certainly says there will be one source of currency in the space, for sure, but it's borderless. And the consensus mechanisms that are market-based, that based on some game theory, actually really fascinating stuff. I'd like to spend more time learning more about how consensus truly works in gaming, because it's very interesting. Blockchain in one slide. Are you ready? Yes. All right. Where's the beer? What kind of party is this? This is crazy town. All right. So let's go through. It's a digital spreadsheet. I've heard some people describe it as a group text, in the same way that if you're participating in a group text and then you delete it from your phone, you haven't deleted it from everybody's phone. And you actually clearly haven't deleted it from your server, which means that you can get a text at 3 in the morning as well, right? So this idea of a digital spreadsheet of transactions that is shared across a network of computers, Each computer that runs a full version of blockchain software is referred to as a node. If you're in computer space, this is 101 stuff, or maybe less than 101. But we use these fancy words of nodes. We're just talking about a computer. You do not have to run a full version of the Bitcoin software in order to participate. All I need is a Bitcoin wallet to be able to transact. But I could recruit my computer, my node, to participate. I'd download the Bitcoin software, I'd run it. Maybe I would participate also in mining. We'll get to that in a moment. But at a bare minimum, I could participate with other network members in securing the network by running the version of the software. Each new transactions, I should say. So now let's just focus on Bitcoin. Which is a cryptocurrency that runs on the network that is the blockchain. The blockchain is the database that is recording Bitcoin transactions, right? So new transactions are broadcast through the software protocol to the network to be verified by each node, each computer that is running a full version that says, Tonya has 1 Bitcoin, Tonya sent it to Sam, right? In order for it to be verified, I actually would have to have a Bitcoin. If not, You go through the rules, and it's the law of code. We don't have to trust anybody, right? We trust that the software, which is open source software, and we can look at the code, and you can vet the code, and you can audit the code to see that it's running the way it is. So either I have it or I don't, and the software does that work. Verified transactions, let me go back one, because this is important and it gets into consensus. You may have heard of proof of work, which is used for the Bitcoin blockchain. There are other types of consensus, proof of stake and other novel ways. We don't have the space to get into that. But the verified transactions are grouped together in regular interval by network consensus. It happens about every 10 minutes for the Bitcoin blockchain. Every 10 minutes. So that could be 30 transactions, that could be 3,000 transactions. Whatever happens in those intervals will be grouped together. I'll say more about that at the next screen. Each group of verified transactions is known as a block. Each group, and think of it as settlement. If you're running a store and you have people come in all day and they're transacting, you're not settling out all of that money until the end of the day usually. Right? That's much longer, wider window than 10 minutes. But it's the same type of idea of settling or settlement. New blocks are added to the chain. Again, now we're talking about a proof of work chain like the Bitcoin blockchain by a special type of computer, a special type of node known as a miner in the proof of work instance. All right? Now, I say compete, that is really not what they're doing. They are competing. Miners are trying to guess by using their computing power over and over and over and over again as fast as possible to be the first one to get the requisite number of leading zeros in this particular numeric sequence to stake their flag in this new block and say, I was the first to solve this. I was the first to guess. I am rewarded with Bitcoin. Right now, if you are successful as a miner to add a new block, it's 25 Bitcoin. The halving event will occur in January, which means that originally a miner received 50 Bitcoin. Every 4 years, there's a halving event, which makes it more scarce, and there will only be 21 million Bitcoin to ever be mined, meaning created, released with the addition of a new block. So I don't care that Bitcoin is 8,000 today, because it could be 80, or it could be 8 cents. It could be nothing. We're like, we don't know. But I am saying that the scarcity is hardwired into the protocol, the software protocol. There will only be 21 million. They'll get more and more scarce. We're having the amount that's in the supply every 4 years until they're all released. Let me get through this entire thing and then go forward. The winner gets the block reward is what we call it. That's here, it's the newly minted Bitcoin, and the block is added to the chain. Blocks are interrelated in a way that I'll explain in the next slide, which creates a chain of blocks or blockchain. Right, before I move on, sir.
Dean Evans, as blocks are verified and added to the chain, there's an incentive for the miners because they're receiving Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens when all of these halving events occur and there's only 21 million out there and transactions are taking place? What happens to that chain then?
The chain will continue in terms of continuing to verify the transactions. The incentives change as well, and it's an age-old question that I don't know the answer to, but the incentives certainly change as you go on. But the value of Bitcoin, presumably, if this bears out the way we think, continues to rise exponentially. But now it's on the holder side as opposed to the miner side, right, sir?
It makes sense. I mean, essentially, if you're giving away a lot to solve the problem, you only need one solution. So if you're giving away too much, you keep having it's going to reduce the number of people, but who cares?
Right.
As long as it's timely, you don't care.
Right. And interestingly, in the intervals, that's a really good point. The difficulty of the equation changes from block to block depending upon how busy the network is. If it's light traffic, it'll be a little easier. If it's heavy traffic, because this is really inefficient. It's great in terms of verification. It's great in terms of not being censorship resistant. Not so great at pushing through transactions, because we're talking, if Visa is doing like 2,000 per second, we're talking 32, something really low. The Ethereum network is doing a better job. There are all these other solutions coming on to try and increase, but that's an interesting point, both on the network traffic side and also the value. So what does this look like? In order to kind of bring this point home, I'll stand over here. Sorry, cameraman, just have to move for a moment. But given what I said about blocks, chains, and et cetera, what that means, you would start here. This would be block 1, we'll call it. The block that comes before it is called the genesis block because there's no block that precedes the first block. So I'll start here from block 1 to make the point. Block 1 transactions, this would be those batch verified transactions that are distilled into what's known as, and Lord knows we don't have time to go through this, but a Merkle root, single alphanumeric chain that represents all of the transactions. That, look at the magic of Salesforce. They're really starting to scare me. The Merkle root is combined with the hash or the single alphanumeric hash of the previous block, and that is distilled into its own alphanumeric chain. So in this way, it's connected. And the same happens for block 2, right? Block 2 transactions distilled to the Merkle root combined with the hash of the previous block header information, which would be like the thumbprint of each block. That becomes a thumbprint of block 2 and so on and so on. The longer the chain, the more difficult it is. If I wanted to change block 87 as a bad actor, I have to change everything that comes before it, which is what makes it so resistant to change. The concerns, keep this in mind and do some research after to look for the 51% attack is a concern. Quantum computing is a concern, for sure. There's an entire, I had the great privilege of sitting in on the Facebook LibreCoin hearings on the House Financial Services Committee side. They were grilling David Marcus before Zuck showed up with his Zuckbuck. Has everybody heard about Libra, Facebook's LibreCoin? You'll start to hear, I call them branded coins or corporate coins. You'll start to see them a lot. JP Morgan has one, Walmart has one. Disney's always had Disney bucks. They're not cryptographically secured, but it's the same idea. Or you go into a casino, you trade your money for their chips. They're not good anywhere else, but they have value within that space. It's the same idea. When I was sitting, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought about going down to House Financial Services. I lost it. Oh, thank you. You go to the head of the class. So after that, they had some closed door sessions with there's an entity called the Global Business Blockchain Corporation or something like that. And they do a lot of, not lobbying, sure, but it's more educational at this point. And what we learned in that space, going back to quantum computing, is that there's this anti-quantum computing workforce at the government trying to figure that out too, and it probably has gone on for some time. By the time they're actually speaking about it in hushed tones, because there's a blockchain caucus there, we were able to speak with them, which was really, really cool. But the great concern is the long and short of the impact that quantum computing will do over being able to take over a network by taking over 51% of the power of the network, because that is the consensus. So the idea, now this would have to be at a state actor level, particularly when you're talking the Bitcoin blockchain. We are going into our 11th year in January. That's a long chain. That's a lot of time without ever being hacked. So that's how resilient it is. So that's the high notes of blockchain 101. We'll move a little more quickly through the high notes of intellectual property and then get to one slide worth of data science use cases I found really interesting, or at least some issues. How many are familiar at all with intellectual property? We can move really quickly. I mean, I'm not going to go fast, but I don't have to go so deeply. When I think of it as an intellectual property lawyer and advising startups and businesses of intellectual capital, property created with the mind, I also know that it's highly undervalued, certainly undermanaged, underexploited, and I use exploit in a good way if you can, right? That you can leverage it, spend it, license it, exploiting it in that way. And so it's really, really important. It's clearly one of the key objectives in mergers and acquisitions. It's important on the patent side for research, development, et cetera. So there are a lot of reasons. I do want to separate, when I think about intellectual property rights and various considerations, you're identifying what the assets are. This will become relevant when we talk about some of the use cases as well and how blockchain technology can help in some of these areas. You're focused on value. Who owns what, right? The chain of title is really important, not just for real property, but also intellectual property. And when I talk about real property, land and things that are built on land. And also an IP strategy. So because there are these exclusive rights of varying lengths, approximately 20 years on the patent side, but the life of an author plus 70 years after the author's death when you're talking about copyright, that's a long-term intellectual property strategy, and you have to put that in place. I also teach wills, trusts, and estates, and we spend a lot of time talking about planning for intellectual property and maybe setting up a specific intellectual property trustee in addition to a trustee that would handle other assets. So it's that important. And when we talk about the types of IP, you usually hear about the big three. There's one that's actually missing, but that's fine. Copyright, patent, trademark, trade secret. I would also put at the state level right of publicity as well. Not as relevant for some of the things, but just to talk about the full portfolio of intellectual property. So when you think about trademark, there's not as much trademark work when I'm counseling clients for blockchain or crypto assets more broadly, cryptocurrencies and other things. But for companies, they're building layer 2 solutions, maybe they have software as a service or they're offering something else, their name, maybe a line of products, education, a series of books on an educational topic, not a single title of a book, but a series. These are all areas where you could secure a trademark on that. And it protects a word, a phrase, a sound, a smell. Can you believe that? Plumeria is a registered trademark, for example. Anything that when you hear it, see it, smell it, that you think of a single producer of that, right? So it helps avoid consumer confusion. And we don't want consumers going into McDowell's and thinking it's McDonald's, right? Is that amazing? It's the most amazing. This is coming to America.
Yeah.
You got to see that, right? It's McDowell's, right? They didn't have the Big Mac. They had the Big Mick. Like, it was too much. So you don't want that to happen. And it's the avoiding the consumer confusion. And that's trademark. Copyright protects literary or artistic works that we say are fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So from the moment I record something or write it down and it's capable of being copied, and it's original, it doesn't have to be unique or novel. It's not the only one, but that I didn't copy, right? And so that's the difference. It protects original work of authorship, fixed in a tangible medium. Copyright doesn't require that it be registered, although there are great benefits of registering the work. But it subsists automatically once the work is fixed in a quote unquote tangible medium. Again, there are a lot of reasons why one should register, but it's not required for the rights to exist. And it's not just a right, it's a bundle of rights. The right to copy, distribute, to make adaptations or derivative works, to perform a work publicly if it's capable of being performed, to display a work publicly if it's capable of being displayed. And it applies to software and object code as well. So it does become relevant in the blockchain space. Now, there are many reasons not to do this for purposes of interoperability and the fact that things change so rapidly. By the time you get it back from the Copyright Office in terms of registration, we have moved on to Web 4. Like, who cares, right? But the rights exist. We are still living in basically the Copyright Act of 1976. It has been changed over time, but that's the one that's currently in force, which is crazy. But I digress. Subject of another thing. We'll put all of this up right now because on the patent side, patents can also protect software as well. So clients would need to know certainly that there might be some copyright protection, Also, patent comes into play. There are 3 types of patents. Patents protect inventions. I feel like everybody in the room would already know that for sure. And so focus in particular, machine, process, article of manufacture, composition of matter, or any improvement thereon. And again, the interesting part that it includes software as well can be quite confusing when people are trying to navigate the difference between providing the know-how, telling the patent office, here is how this can be built, or this is how this process can be done. In exchange for that knowledge, they get to be protected and have the right to exclude for 20 years. That means that they don't have to do anything with it, but they can prevent others from doing so. And it's the reason that we have Tylenol for years, and then we can have eventually the generic acetaminophen. We still might have goodwill and brand reputation and grab Tylenol, even though the thing next to it is absolutely 100% the same from a compositional point of view. Literally the same. But we might grab Tylenol because of the trademark goodwill, interestingly, all right? Right to exclude 20-year term. Final one is trade secret. Sometimes we don't want to tell the government or anyone else how to make it. And if it's not immediately obvious, like a bicycle that has 2 wheels, and like you can see everything and all the mechanics, then trade secret's not gonna work because people literally see. But it might be the ingredients or the recipe for Coca-Cola, or those beans that dog is always talking about, right? Because we can't quite figure it out. It's trade secret. I don't want to tell, because trade secret lasts as long as the secret is a secret, much longer than patent. So that sometimes is an option as well. One quick word about open source software. So as I mentioned, this great need for interoperability for sure, and that's a big part of crypto culture and blockchain culture. From a cypherpunk perspective, a libertarian perspective, it's like, I want to see, I don't know about trust, but I do want to verify, and I need to know, because the whole point in 2008, 2009 during the financial crisis is the sentiment was, we can't trust the banks, we can't trust the rating agencies, we can't trust the government. What can we trust? It's like, I don't even trust you, you shouldn't trust me. Let's trust the code. And the only way we can trust this code is if we can see it. So they don't have an interest in registering the copyright, they don't have an interest in a patent. In fact, anyone who started patenting things and locking it down would be immediately suspect in a pure crypto environment. Now, for those who have to keep the lights on and like their car and a mortgage and want to retire someday, I don't have a problem with building on top of it, but we do want to see the base layer to see how it functions and how it works. And then we get to decide. Now, there are applications built on top of these protocols. The first application, as we said, was cryptocurrency. There are other types of protocols and benefits built on top, and that would be a great subject for another day as well. But public blockchains are open source. If you want to make it proprietary, then you would have a more limited or private chain. There are reasons to do that. Healthcare is really booming in the blockchain space, and using, empowering patients to have their information be portable. There are identity solutions that are really, really interesting. I don't think people need to know where I live in order to know whether or not I'm 21. So we actually give people a lot of information about us. She seems like a nice lady at the Whole Foods. I don't know her, right? But I love red wine, and she should just know, is this woman older or old enough to drink? That's all they need to know. And so there are great identity solutions there too. And there are some reasons to keep things private. One thing that happens on the patent side, a lot of people throw up white papers to say everything from a technical perspective that has to be done or can be done in order to get people to use the network because of the network effects. But if you put this up in public, that white paper becomes what we call prior art. You have 1 year from the existence of prior art to file a patent application. It is a hard and fast and bright line. And unintentionally, people who may have wanted to monetize are unable to because of putting up their white paper. And so I talk a lot about that, and that's when I start to get the crypto folks a little more interested in not wanting to preempt their ability to leverage their innovation. And That's enough for that one. I'll put up some intellectual property use cases. So this slide talks about the different ways that the intellectual property space can benefit from blockchain. So providing evidence of authorship. So if one was to register copyright, that goes into a public record. We could go to the Copyright Office, copyright.gov, and search the database. But assuming someone registers, because I told you earlier, they don't even have to, and then there's some transfer that we don't know about, all of a sudden we don't even know who necessarily owns it. But if we can verify it, if it's recorded to a blockchain that can't be recorded, there are blessings and curses with that. What if there's data error, right? Because it becomes garbage in, garbage out. And we still would have to resolve that, but it could be a great evidence of ownership, to be sure. The registration and clearance of rights can happen pretty automatically. Not talking tonight about smart contracts, but smart contracts code, it's not a contract. Sorry, don't mean to touch that. You'll hear about smart contracts. It's not a contract in the terms that you may be familiar of: offer, acceptance, consideration, meeting of the minds. Smart contracts are bits of code that automate performance. Part of some of the work I used to do on the literary law side, I could think of a contract that says my client's royalties escalate every 5,000 units sold, books. And they would have to call me, we call the agent, let's to make sure, we have to have a reserve because we're not sure. That wouldn't have to happen if through smart contracts, there could be, let's call it some oracle informing the smart contract that said 5,001 copies, and the money could move automatically. That's removing me. I'm perfectly happy just to talk to my client about all the awesome things we can do. You don't have to call me at $300-400 an hour to tell you whether or not the royalties have escalated. So that's another area that could facilitate performance. Control and tracking. First use and priority is really important in the trademark space to assert trademark interests, and so that's another great area. DRM, or digital rights management. There's some really great things going on in the entertainment world. Ujo Music, UJO Music, is a crypto or blockchain-based platform that directly connects artists with their listeners. And through a series of smart contracts, every time Imogene Heap is one of the first to release through Ujo Music, she gets her money instantly, the platform gets its money, and the person gets its file. The files aren't stored on a blockchain, that's a separate process, but that is automated in a way that is extraordinary and really empowering to creators. Enforcement is really great with blockchains as well, through smart contracts is integrated. I love this for artists as well. So not only that first payment, but any downstream payment. So every time that work that is represented in a cryptographic form exchanges hands or wallets, as the case would be, there could be a smart contract that kicks back money to the original creator, fully automated, because that's another thing. Once I maybe create a painting and want to represent it in token form, and I could, through that token, participate in any downstream sale. That also gets to one of the most important things, not only in the fine art world, but also in pharmaceuticals, in food safety, the provenance of things. We don't have to shut down all of romaine lettuce if that information about that specific supplier with the bad romaine lettuce is identified. You don't cripple an entire industry because we don't know the actual source. So food safety, drug safety, provenance of fine goods as well. Last slide, and then I'll take your questions. So the question here, so we're talking about data, right? And that comes into play when you think of data science and from a research perspective, why this matters and how, one, the areas to research and why it might be a benefit to utilize blockchain in some way with respect to data that is used and managed in data science. So can blockchain disrupt this space as well? So we know that data science extracts knowledge, and with that knowledge, gaining insights from studying that data. I also said a bit earlier, we are always concerned with garbage in, garbage out, and the verification of data, the organization of data, also using other Web3 technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning integrated, and that's a really interesting area as well. But we're looking at statistics, AI, ML, analyzing processes using data. And obviously both of these areas involve data, blockchains, database, data science, Avi. So both are also using algorithms as well. That's governing the various interactions of the various parties and also the bits of information too. And so if data science is used for prediction, it can be partnered in a really interesting way with the recording and verification of data through blockchains as well. They have a long way to go because not a lot of people are using it, but I could envision a world where we certainly do, right? So you basically learn like 2 years worth of law school in about an hour. You're amazing. And I know that's a lot to throw at you, but I love that I saw a lot of nods and like, I think I'm there, and oh, at least I can see conceptually how this might be used. And with that, let me pause or stop and take your questions and take the temperature of the room. How are you feeling? What are you thinking, sir?
You talked about being a distributed database, and talk about the chain. The chain seems like it's really a checksum or a confirmation of the data, not the actual data. So where's the actual data stored? If the miners don't have all that, I'm assuming.
It is all, I wish we, could you go to etherscan.io?
Sure. Maybe Salesforce will.
It's a recording that a transaction took place. As opposed to a file that is stored like in Box or Dropbox or something like that. Actually, databases are, blockchains are horrible places for that. It takes up too much bandwidth. The storage would be off the charts. It is a record, like true record keeping back to the double entry ledger system. Tonya had 1 Bitcoin, Tonya sent 1 Bitcoin to Bob, right? It is that a thing occurred.
So for property, how do you get it in there? How do you define, it's like.
It's the same way that we record it. Think of it this
Book
way.
and page is what.
That's correct.
Right?
Book and page.
But that information goes in, that's just the same ledger information.
That is correct. That's correct. But what happens is you make something that is traditional. We're talking real property now. You make something that tends to be pretty illiquid, particularly in certain markets, or if I'm trying to buy property in China or Australia or something like that, if it's represented in a cryptographically secured token that I can trade 24/7, 365, it opens up markets. So you may not avoid all of the concerns that we have in a paper world, where if I go and pull out a deed book and I have to turn to page 327 and see Tonya traded to, or transferred the deed to, et cetera, et cetera. We always have these representations, but are the representations as easy to change or manipulate?
I mean, the problem with the book and page is the same problem with this, right? That you wanted to go into now.
True, and but
not on that book and page day.
Well, but don't we? But actually, from a chain of title is really important. It's the reason that we have title insurance, right? That when you go and you buy property and you want to sit down, and they trace it back pretty far. Each state has its own rules, I'll say, about how far you have to go back. And you're checking grantees back and grantors coming up, right? And you have this window of time, et cetera, et cetera. But there's so many things that could happen in between. I talk in property about the wild deed scenario, and students always ask me, who is this a-hole that's going around selling property he or she doesn't have? Yeah. But it happens all the time. It's the reason we have title insurance in case something happens, where there's someone who represents that they have a deed. We could draw up a deed right now, right? But in a cryptographically secured world, you actually can't. Now, if somebody moves in And you have a real world asset that is separated from the representation of it, but we have that now. It's an area that can be improved upon dramatically in terms of reducing the amount of fraud that goes on in public record space. Other questions? You're mesmerized and dazzled with my brilliance and charm? I mean, it could happen. Ask Valentine's Day. Sorry.
You asked me to bring up Etherscan.
Oh, yay.
What is this?
All right, so this is a mess, but it's amazing. It's my mess. These are live transactions going on in real time. So you can go at any time of the day or night and actually see blocks being formed, and you literally see the address of the person, the person or entity from. And this is the representation. What I didn't talk about is blockchain or crypto wallets, and the fact that you don't have to run software, but you can participate by having a wallet, which means that you have that public key, which loosely would be like the address to your home, and your private key, which is literally the key that you use to get in and out of your home. You would never give anyone else your private key, but you would tell them where you live so they could send you mail. Here, people know the public address so that this person or entity has sent 0.00312 Ethereum to this. It's happened 20 seconds ago, already settled, already transferred, and they're happening in real time over and over and over again. So back to your original point that this is the new ledger, which gets to your point earlier about the distributed ledger. The distributed nature of it means that there is a record of all of these transactions that is replicated on every node. So if we had 10 nodes or 10 computers running the Ethereum protocol and we destroyed them all, have we destroyed the information? As long as there is one node in the world running this full version, it exists. And it's on tens of thousands of millions of computers, depending upon the network. Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, those are some of the big ones that you'll hear about. I'm working with a project right now called MakerDAO. They have an extraordinary platform. This is all going on all day, all night, 24/7, 365. And as long as there's one, and the fact that you don't have a computer that says it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So in that way, it becomes resistant to governments, it becomes resistant to bad actors, anyone who might want to change it. Because you can take down a computer without taking down the record of the truth. And that's the beauty of that. Yes, and then I'll come over here.
Can you talk a little bit about, very new to this world, so about value and how that translates between crypto and like traditional currency?
It's all a social construct.
Yeah.
It really, the dollar hasn't been backed by gold in how long?
Right.
We have made an agreement on the full faith and credit of this. We made it up.
Yeah.
And we agreed to this dream, right? Because before this, we could have cowrie shells. We could trade in sugar, right? Commodities. And we make an agreement about the value at any given time. The value fluctuates unbelievably, and you're concerned about market manipulation, but who isn't, even in stocks? Right? We're concerned that what we have in the crypto community known as whales that hold a ton of crypto, that them moving a requisite portion of it actually does have an impact, because as much as we talk about the crypto space, governments are paying attention because it hasn't gone away, but we're not moving any markets with crypto right now. Right? Or else they'd put the kibosh on it a little more quickly. I have one of the commissioners of the SEC, Hester Peirce, known as Crypto Mom, because she's a decided minority of the 5-member commission about really supporting the space. The other commissioners not so excited about crypto. But they are giving, in fairness to them, they're providing enough space they want to support innovation while protecting consumers. They really do. And that's their job, right? But back to your original question of value, it's our great dream. in our social construct here. And the final point is that when you have market participants who, in a very liquid space, like if we were to pull up coin market cap, you would see the list. There are over 2,500. There might even be 3,000 at this type, different types of cryptocurrencies. We have Bitcoin. You may hear the term S-coin, which means alternatives to Bitcoin. They are based on the Bitcoin protocol, but decided that they didn't agree, and so they were going to form their own fork. We call it a hard fork to something else. I don't consider Ethereum and other platforms to be an S-coin or an altcoin because they're not based on Bitcoin. That's where that traditionally came from. But what you'll see here, Bitcoin, because you just have this what is it, supply and circulation. We're getting pretty close to 21, just so we're clear. We're not far away from it now. I can't remember the year that it's supposed to happen, but you mathematicians, you figure it out. Number 2, Ethereum, XRP. Tether is what we call a stable coin that is purportedly pegged to the dollar. It will always, and you'll hear a lot about stable coins too, because governments are moving to create what we call digital fiat. Fiat is government money. And they're looking for ways to have lower cost because it actually costs a lot to print paper money and the coins and all of that. They're moving, and they can track us a lot better with that type of thing. Tether is not run by a government, but we've never seen their books. That's the problem. But the idea of stable coins is a good one because with fluctuations that the Bitcoin prices, it was 84 earlier today, is 76. People sometimes want to get out and they don't want to get out of crypto, but they want to get out of their position in one of these until they stabilize. And so they'll get one that has a representation of $1, an asset that's backed with something. Sir, did I come back? Oh no, I'm so sorry. Joe, I apologize.
Do you see any issues with scale in terms of long time, large size, whatever?
In terms of mass adoption, that's where we are. We have to get people, in order for mass adoption to happen in crypto, people will have to have trust and faith in it. There may be another application that will be the quote unquote killer app that would lead people to mass adoption. Right now, it's some crazy people like me just hanging out, thinking like we're going to change the world. So
how far are we away from it? What would the impact be of the quantum computing?
I think it would be dramatic because of the 51% attacks, or even I've read that it wouldn't take controlling 51% of computing power to actually take over a network. It could be something more like 33%. And that's a frightening proposition when people are really, it's only as good as the faith in the network or the protocol and the safety of it, right? So
even beyond just the cryptocurrency, if healthcare organizations are relying on it for all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
Or how are they justifying the investment in this, knowing that at some point it could be moved, right?
So for them, they would be operating permissioned or private networks or consortium networks where various systems would agree that they would share baseline client information. And they control it in the same way you might control an intranet rather than the internet. Right, so there are a lot of systems that have their own intranet system, and you have to have access to it, and they have controls over it. Whatever the difficulties of it, what they're doing now is really not working. It's not working well in the healthcare world at all. When you think about just going to the management of patient data. Now it has to be secure, so that's why it will never be a public permission chain. They're not. Those healthcare systems are not going to register their information on the Bitcoin blockchain. And I will say you can store other bits of information beyond transfer of Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, but it wasn't built for that. The Ethereum network was touted as being the world's computer, and that's why smart contracts and other things can be more easily integrated. The idea of that is what healthcare industries, entertainment companies are imagining, but they're going to lock it down. So it'll be more like the older client server model, but they'll take the benefits of blockchain to make things better, faster, cheaper, but they're still going to control them.
The big difference is that all these currencies are an implementation of the blockchain.
Correct.
And the blockchain technology is being used by a different industry.
And which is why, taking it back to your point, we're talking about distributed ledgers and cryptographically verified and secured information that doesn't function don't necessarily have to have blocks and chains of information. So to use distributed ledger technology to form blockchains is one thing, but you can use that technology and you can use smart contracts and other methods that this technology provides to solve for other problems that wouldn't necessarily have to be in a block form in the chain in the way that I described.
Dean Evans, I think we have time for one more question before we shift
But we
into
have beers.
the networking portion, if there is one.
Fantastic. I appreciate your time and attention. Please, I'm on Twitter, also Instagram. I'm IP Prof Evans, or you could go to proftonyaevans.com. I have a podcast in my not so spare time. I don't sleep, but I really enjoy what I do, and I've enjoyed you all tonight. So thank you very much. Thanks, Matt.